Thank you, and congratulations to each and every one of you, especially to the graduates of the ROTC program and to our veterans. Thank you for your service to the United States of America. It is truly a privilege to be invited to share a few words with the Oregon State University graduating class of 2023. You have come so far since the day you first walked onto campus. I can still remember the day I moved into my freshman dorm room at Finley Hall. I was 17, from Junction City, Oregon. I had zero frame of reference for this place at all. And over the next 5 years, and yes, it took me 5 to graduate, I sprawled on the lawn in front of Memorial Union. I studied countless hours at the Valley Library. I was also part of the student section in 1998 that stormed the football field, this very field, like a bunch of lunatics after beating the Oregon Ducks 44-41 in double overtime. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and we had a brand new freshman quarterback that year named Jonathan Smith. I have sat exactly where you are sitting, and I'm going to share with you the single most important thing that I have learned in the 23 years since. I'm going to tell you 4 short stories. All of them are true. But I'm also going to tell you the story that I chose to tell myself about myself in those moments. Because the intentional choice, how you tell the story of your own experience, truly is the reason that I am who I am today. It's also the reason why I'm standing here. First story. I'm a poor kid from nowhere. Like most kids in my hometown, we rely on food stamps. Many of my clothes come from black trash bags the church gathers for donations. I've learned how to scavenge old sheets from Goodwill and free bins at garage sales and sew them together into tablecloths and curtains. My parents don't have college degrees, and I actually don't know anyone who has a 4-year college degree. But I secretly decide at age 7 that I want to become a doctor. I'm obsessed with the diseases that shape human history. I somehow fall in love with Ebola and bubonic plague, and I want to know everything about them. When I get to high school, I tell my guidance counselor that I plan to attend a 4-year college and major in pre-med. Kids from Junction City don't become doctors, she says. Maybe you could take a few classes at the trade school and become a paramedic. My church discourages girls from going to college at all. I'm expected to marry young and maybe become a pastor's wife. And then there's the problem of money. My estimated family contribution on the FAFSA form was 0, meaning we had 0 financial contribution to any college fees. Already it's shaping up to be a story, but this is not the whole story. It's really just the beginning of one. And already it can be told in different ways. I can think of at least 2 versions, both of which are 100% true. Version 1 goes something like this. I was born unlucky. Nobody expects me to even try. It's not my fault that life screwed me. I can stay in Junction City, work at the gas station like my friends, and simmer with anger at the systems that handicap kids like me for the rest of my life. And I wouldn't have been wrong. But version number 2, also 100% true, is nearly the opposite. I'm a poor kid from nowhere, but my poverty is a gift. It's left me with skills others lack. How to scavenge things, food and clothes, for example. And it's left me scared to death of failing. So I will study harder than anyone around me. It's forced me to figure out how to get to college on my own because I have to. I'm desperate. I'll do anything to claw my way out. Now, as it turned out, what looked like my misfortune actually qualified me for a full ride scholarship from the Ford Family Foundation. The Ford Family Foundation had made its money from lumber mills, those lumber mills in rural Oregon, and they went looking for rural kids exactly like me. Actually, having a near zero estimated family contribution was a stroke of luck because you couldn't get the scholarship without extreme need. The foundation was making a bet, and in retrospect, I understand a little bit more now about the bet the foundation was making. They were betting on version number 2. So off I went to OSU with a Ford scholarship to study pre-med. My dream of becoming a doctor still seemed very improbable, but now I had a path. Second story, I failed right here in this school. The first 2 years of college, I got a C- in biology, a C in chemistry, and flunked calculus twice. But I'd never had AP courses my classmates had had, and I just couldn't figure out, how do you learn the basic material? How do you study at a college level? With a 2.8 GPA, it seemed totally reasonable when the pre-med advisor pulled me aside and told me she was kicking me out of the pre-med program. Fair. She said, we need to save our resources for kids who actually have a shot. For about 3 months, I assumed she was right. My misery, my academic shortfalls, and my outright humiliation seemed to confirm that I just wasn't cut out to be a doctor. I was living in version number 1. But then something happened. Kenneth Ford died, the founder of the Ford Family Foundation, the guy who had built the lumber company and plucked me out of Junction City and sent me to college. On instinct, I went to his funeral, and it was in Roseburg, Oregon. I watched in bewilderment as the church filled, not with rich business people, but with hundreds of Wrangler and flannel-clad lumberjacks. Mr. Ford had come from nothing. He'd built his entire dynasty by scavenging scraps and piecing together cast-off parts from sawmills, and the way that this man had told his story had turned his disadvantages into a huge advantage, and all these lumberjacks were there to thank him for it, for his insistence on telling his story one way rather than another. Right there at the funeral reception, I sat down in the corner and I flipped over a napkin, and I started figuring out what grades it would take to get my GPA from a 2.8 to a 3.5. Since I'd lost my spot in the pre-med program, which is fair, I'd have to change my major. I'd need to change it to microbiology. I'd need to do a 5th year of college so I could accumulate more straight A's, and so on and so on. So what was actually happening in that church during Mr. Ford's funeral? Version number 2 of my story was kicking in. What if getting kicked out of the pre-med program was the greatest thing? Because what if microbiology is exactly where I'm supposed to be? And what if the necessity of making a comeback from way behind is actually for my own benefit, to show myself what I'm capable of? So I made a decision that day to embrace version number 2. I wanted to be like Mr. Ford, the hero of my circumstances, not the victim. Third story. I have never actually shared this story publicly, so let me begin by apologizing to Oregon Health and Science University. I was never actually admitted into your summer neurobiology internship program. I did, however, receive your rejection letter near the end of my OSU junior year. The problem is, I'd grown too used to telling version number 2 to accept that rejection was the end of the story. You see, I was no longer sure that any blocked path was actually blocked. So I started calling the OHSU neurobiology program office every day. And every day, Rosalie, we got to know each other really well, Rosalie replied, "Hello, Charity. No internship spots have opened. No, we don't anticipate any too. Okay, Charity, goodbye." This went on for weeks. It was now the end of the school year, and one day I was surprised to hear a different voice answer the phone. And I said, "Where's Rosalie?" She said, "Oh, Rosalie got the flu. I'm filling in today. How can I help you?" So I started to explain, but she was impatient. "I'm transferring you to Dr. Kisby," she said. "Please hold on." Click, click. Now, Dr. Kisby ran the entire OHSU program, and 5 seconds later, he's on the other end of the line telling me all about his projects of identifying oxidative damage in human SY5Y neuroblastoma cell lines, and he went on for 30 minutes. He maybe took 2 breaths, and at the end of it, he said, "Got all that? All right, see you Monday." Click. So what do you do? What do you do? I'll tell you what I did. I packed a suitcase, and I drove to Portland, and I showed up on Monday. About halfway through internship orientation, Dr. Kisby realized he'd made a mistake, because I pulled him aside and I said I actually technically was not admitted to the program. He stared at me for a very long moment he had these thick Coke bottle glasses, and he stared at me. I didn't know what he was going to say. Finally, he shrugged his shoulders and he said, "Well, you're here. Might as well stay." That became my honors thesis. Finally, the fourth story. It was my second day on the job, 2018. I'd just become the assistant director of public health for the state of California. Basically, that means the number 2 doctor for California. To take the job, I'd had to leave everything and everyone I knew behind. I was living out of a suitcase in a 200 square foot pool house a few minutes from the state capitol in Sacramento. I was lonely, I was tired, I'd taken a huge pay cut in the bargain. At a real low moment that day, second day of work, I was summoned to my boss's office, and I was told about a crisis developing on the southern border. There was a health crisis. Regional tensions were mounting as thousands of migrant caravans with people seeking asylum in the United States began to arrive, and thousands of migrant families were showing up on the streets of San Diego after prolonged federal custody. There were reports of very sick babies and elderly collapsing, and those reports were growing. It was shaping up to essentially be a politically volatile standoff between local, state, and federal authorities with starkly different values. Any misstep here would cost a California public servant their career, not to mention becoming an enemy of the White House. Would I go? By this point in my life, I was deeply familiar with the choice that came next, and I knew it had little to do with the external world. It was a choice between 2 versions of my story, and both could be true. Version number 1, I'm exhausted. I just got here. I've already given up everything that could possibly be asked of me. This is unfair. I shouldn't have to go. It's actually someone else's responsibility. It actually was. But version number 2, I'm grateful for this opportunity because I actually do know what to do. I've dealt with disease outbreaks and migrant populations and stood up makeshift healthcare systems before. It's the work that I love. I bet I can figure out how to coordinate this without making too many enemies. Maybe without the United States government even knowing. I'll learn stuff I could learn in no other way. You see, it just happens over and over. This story, this choice of which story you want to tell yourself about yourself. Your lives will have lots of these in them. It's silent, it's personal, and it's invisible. Had I not made the choice of version number 2 of my story in that moment, my entire role in the 2020 pandemic response would have gone very differently. I would not have gotten into a nasty fight with the Department of Homeland Security, and I would never have earned their respect. They would never have called me up later to whisper to me that I should join a secret group called the Wolverines to form a pandemic response plan for the United States of America. I certainly wouldn't be here. This is the lesson I have learned. We become the stories that we tell. It's a frightening thought, but it's true. You will become the story that you tell about yourself, but it's also hopeful. You have a choice. As you go out from here, OSU graduating class of 2023, you are setting out to tell a story. I know that every one of you can tell it wisely. I know that every one of you can tell it well. But I also know you cannot avoid telling it, and that version that you choose will shape you. Thank you, and go Beavs.